Please proceed.
Start. Okay, sir. Good morning to all the
Unmute చేయి.
Good morning to all the dignitaries and participants. On behalf of students, staff of Bapatla College of Pharmacy, I welcome you all for the last day session on 3 days international short-term training program on innovative research trends in pharma industry organized by Department of Pharmaceutics, Bapatla College of Pharmacy in association with Acharya Nagarjuna University College of Pharmaceutical Sciences. It is today's resource person, Dr. Bhupesh Pratap. He is a degreed pharmacologist with substantial formulation development in biopharmaceutics as well as pharmacokinetics experience. Sir has specialist in biopharmaceutics and pharmacokinetics and clinical studies. Sir has more than 13 years experience in the field of biopharmaceutics and pharmacokinetics. He has developed more than 100 ANDA products and more than 5,000 B2 products, and he is specialist in PBPK modeling and simulation, in vitro in vivo correlation studies, and simulation-based drug development. Sir has previous work experience in Dr. Reddy's Laboratories and Intas Pharmaceuticals. Presently, he is working with Perigo R&D company. Now, Bhupesh sir, start your presentation, sir. Bhupesh sir?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your kind words. Just give me a minute.
Sir.
Yeah, let me share my screen with you. Yeah. Right, you all can see the slide now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Dr. Rajalakshmi, for your kind words and giving me an opportunity to talk to this team on PBPK modeling and all. So I welcome everyone. I'm glad to be part of this group where we are going to share some information, some knowledge, what I have gained over a period of years on this PBPK modeling in drug development. So before I start my presentation, I just want to give a brief disclaimer. So whatever I'm expressing over here are solely mine, and they do not necessarily represent the views of my current or past organization. And in this presentation, basically few figures from internet and few data from literature source, and this is only made for non-profit educational purpose. So without spending much time on these things, let's start with the presentation. In today's presentation, I will be talking about few of the basics of I will be talking two things on in vitro in vivo correlation, what exactly it is, how we develop that, what are the limitations. And further, I will be talking about PBPK modeling, its history and application, where we can use that. Then what is the process to develop a PBPK model? Few of the case studies, and at the end, we will be talking about regulatory acceptance for PBPK modeling and challenges what we normally face while having this model. So the first thing I would like to talk about, it's a very basic information available for everyone. But the most important part over here is for getting absorbed in the body, drug should be present in a form of a solubilized, drug should be available in a dissolved form at the site of absorption. If you have an IR dosage form, the drug basically goes through disintegration process first, and then the disintegrated particles dissolve, and finally drug is available for your absorption. If you are having an ER matrix, it could be based on two types. It could be erosion-based mechanism where the drug will outer layer will erode and release the drug, and from there the drug will get absorbed, dissolved, and finally released at the site of absorption. If it is a diffusion-based mechanism, drug will diffuse out of your ER tablet and will be readily available for an absorption. If it is an ER reservoir, the drug will be coming out via membrane diffusion, and if it has an ER osmotic pump, the drug will be coming out from the osmosis part. But the most important factor over here is dissolved drug is required for the site of absorption. When the drug is dissolved and available at this point, at this site, the absorption will happen through the GIT wall, and drug will finally reach the systemic circulation. So now we know that how the drug is going to get absorbed in the body, but how the dosage form performs, how to check how what is the performance parameters for my dosage form. So when we develop a formulation, the most important part is in vitro dissolution. This is the first check what normally we have during the initial development purpose. So once you have the dosage form, you administer it with a glass of water or as per the dosing recommendation. Drug reaches into the GIT where it gets, as we have seen, it will get dissolved by following a certain pathway. And when the drug is dissolved, it will permeate through the GIT wall and reach to the blood. Once the drug reaches the blood, we have normally PK measurements. What we do to see how my drug is behaving over there. And once the drug is in blood, it finally travels through the blood and reaches at the site of action, where and it shows the therapeutic effect. And for that, we have a clinical or a PD measurement done, and it shows the different therapeutic responses over there. But now, when this theory was evolving, then there came a concept of asking a question that can my in vitro performance testing, for example, my in vitro dissolution, would be serve as a surrogate for in vivo performance, or it can predict my PK profile, how exactly it is behaving. So, and when the time evolved in year 2000 onwards, there came a concept which keep on saying, which further ask a question: can my in vivo performance or my PK profile will be able to predict my therapeutic performance? So, based on these two factors, the whole concept of PBPK modeling was based on. So let's talk about the first thing first. The first question was, can my in vitro performance testing would be able to predict my in vivo performance? And because of this, the concept mathematical model, which is used to describe the relationship between any in vitro property in relation to an in vivo response. When we say in vitro property, it could be a rate and extent of drug release, it could be T50 value, it could be mean dissolution time, it could be anything. And in vivo response are basically the values what we get from the plasma concentration curve. It could be Cmax, it could be Tmax, it could be AUC, or it could be the actual amount of drug absorbed. So what exactly IVIVC? IVIVC basically plugs in the data from in vitro and in vivo, and it shows how exactly they are correlated. But the main, whenever someone is developing this model, or they should focus on two very, very important points, which was the basics, which was the basis of this IVIVC correlation. The first point was absorption of drug is instantaneous after drug dissolution. Is this always true? Is the drug always available for absorption just after getting dissolved in the body? Sometimes yes, but most of the times no. There might be a delay. There might be drug is first moving to adipose tissue and then coming out of it. And the second event, one have to pay attention while developing an IVIVC. So after this comes what are the different type of IVIVC? Normally, IVIVC are defined into 4 different parts. So when we say level of correlation, what exactly it is? So in level 1 correlation, we have a point-to-point correlation between an in vitro and in vivo data. It means whatever in vitro data we have generated at our end, it correlates exactly same to the in vivo profile or in vivo absorption what we have observed. Level B correlation is basically based on the principle of statistical movement analysis. It means you can take a mean dissolution time in vitro and you can correlate it with the mean residence time or mean dissolution time in vivo, and you can have your graph and see what kind of correlation does it have. Level C correlation is basically in this correlation, one of the PK parameters is correlated with any one of the in vitro parameters. This will not be the exact point-to-point matching, but it could be like, your T50 is matching with the Cmax, or your T100 is matching with AUC. So these are, and when we talk about multiple level C correlation, over there, basically the data from, multiple data from these parameters. We can take a value of T10, we can take a value of T50%, and we can have a value of T100%, and we can correlate those values with my Cmax, with my AC 0 to T, and with my AC 0 to infinity. So out of these three correlations, the strongest one and the most powerful one, and the one which is basically accepted wholeheartedly by industry and by regulatory authority, is level A correlation. Level B correlation come at second number, and level C is the least informative, and it is not accepted much by regulatory authority. So now we know what is IV-IVC, what are the different type of IV-IVC. Now comes the question, how to develop an IV-IVC model, how to develop an IV-IVC correlation. So this is a very basic chart, a very basic image which expresses the various steps involved into IV-IVC. The first and most important step is in vitro release testing. So when we say in vitro release testing, and if you want to develop a full-fledged IV-IVC, we need to have we need to have a product. We need to have three different formulation with slow, medium, and fast dissolution profile. When we say slow, medium, and fast, we mean that difference in the dissolution should always be more than 10%. If it is falling into 10% criteria, they will simply the F2 would be close to 50, and they will be considered as similar dosage form. So whenever you are planning to do this, try to have a formulation where there is a gap of more than 15% in the dissolution parameter. So once you have this in vitro profile, the second step is to have the in vivo data available. So what we do, basically for any to generate the in vivo study data, we need to do a B study in healthy volunteers. If you look at this graph, you can see that, okay, we have three different profiles, which could be stated, you can say that this is fast, this is medium, and this is slow. But you can also see a graph coming over here. So what exactly is this graph? So while developing an IV-IVC, we need to have a data not only on slow, medium, and fast dissolution profile, but to generate an UIR data, we need to have a data from most preferably on intravenous formulation. And if IV formulation data is not available, you can use any IR data for generation of the UIR. Once you have this data, we need to do the deconvolution to draw our percentage absorbed curve. Once we have this information, this deconvolution gives you the estimated in vivo time course, how my absorption is working and how my drug is moving in the body. And once we have this information, we can have it in the form of linear curve or a non-linear correlation, and we can have our graph available for us. We can have our linear graph, which will follow y is equal to mx plus c equation, or we can have any non-linear equation available for my model. So one of the most important factor over here is time scaling or time shifting. So what exactly is time scaling? Many times when we do a dissolution, what we see that my release from my formulation is it's releasing 100% in 1 hour. But if you look at the Tmax value, my Tmax is coming as 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours. So how to do that? How to match those two things? So that the time scaling comes into that part. And for time scaling, we normally follow the Levy plot. And you can have a certain factor which you will multiply it to your in vitro dissolution data, and it will be correlating with your in vivo release mechanism. So once you have this IV-IVC correlation done, the next step comes to validate your IV-IVC. So how we validate IV-IVC? Normally there are basically two validation process. The first one is internal validation. In internal validation, what we do, we basically take the data from the same batch which has been used to develop an IV-IVC. And you have to go back, you have to put the data in your model, and it will give you an outcome. So by that way, you can predict, you can validate your model that whatever values we are putting in, we are getting the same response out of it. And the second one is external validation. Over here, we use dissolution data from batches other than what have been used into developing IVIVC. So once we have our method, our IVIVC model developed, validated, the next steps come to the evaluation or predictability. So what we do into this part, we normally, we have developed our model. We take a batch for which we want to predict what my outcome is. We pull that, we put in that data into this graph, and then we will have our internal and external predictability data available. And my prediction error should be less than 10% for my Cmax and AUC. So this is basically used for prediction of proposed new batches. If I have to further simplify it and talk more about the deconvolution process, how exactly it is done, or even simplify this thing, how can we do that? So this is the graph. So what we talk about, first we need to have an in vitro data on the same batches that in vivo data has been generated. Now to match, to have a similar kind of in vitro profile, we need to deconvolute this data into form of, so that it can have a similar profile as compared to in vivo. So what do we do? We basically deconvolute. What deconvolution is? It is basically used to evaluate in vivo release from PK profile when unit impulse response is available. What is UIR? UIR is nothing, but it gives you the basic information about the drug movement in the body. What will happen if I administer 1 mg of drug into my body? So it will calculate all the parameters. It will calculate your fraction absorbed. It will calculate your absorption rate constant. It will calculate all parameters, and it will give you the value of those parameters. Now, how to do the deconvolution? What are the steps involved? What are the methods? How, as a scientist or as a student, people can do that? So if your drug follows one compartment model, you can use Wagner-Nelson method over there. If your formulation, if your drug follows two compartment model, you can use 2 compartment or 3 compartment. You can use Lou-Regal method. And if you don't have any of the data available, you can normally use numerical deconvolution. Using Wagner-Nelson is pretty simple. It's a very easy equation what any scientist, any student can use. But when it comes to Lou-Regelmann, the calculation turns into a bit complicated. It turns a bit complicated, and it's not possible to do it into Excel sheet from a normal person. But for these things, there are various softwares available in public domain. There are some of free software, some are paid, but you can use that data. Over a period of time, I have calculated one Excel spreadsheet where you can calculate the percentage absorbed for 2 compartment, 3 compartment, and even 4 and 5 compartments. So once we have this data, once we have a deconvoluted data and in vitro data, we draw, we make our prediction, we make our model, we develop our IVIVC model, we validate it, and again we put in the in vitro data for the batch for which we want to do the prediction. And once this data has been plugged into this model, we go for the convolution process to predict the in vivo profile. So what is convolution? Convolution is basically exact opposite of deconvolution, where we use dissolution data and whatever we have generated to predict the plasma profile. So this is a very simple model which explains how IVIVC is being done. So now we all know that this is a very good tool. So what next? Why this tool is not being used very prominently in industry or even in the academics? The first major problem is availability of data and resources. See, if you go with the basic IVIVC, you need to have 3 dissolution data available for slow, medium, and fast profile. You need to have an IR data available. You need to have an IV data available. Is it really feasible for any academics or any small generic company to do a full-fledged bioequivalence study using 3 different formulations? It's very, very difficult. It is very costly, and it is time-consuming as well. So what is the disconnect? How we can bridge the gap? If you are working in a pharmaceutical company or a small pharmaceutical company, or if you are working in academics, the first step you should do is always go back and search for published IR or IV data to generate UIR. There are various free tools available. You can use a PK Solver. It's a free tool available to evaluate these kind of data. You can use that. You can also look for published IVIVC data for similar formulation type for the same drug. If you have that data, you can develop the same model at your end and see what kind of responses you are getting. So once you have your IVIVC developed at your end, plug into the data from your formulation and predict what kind of behavior your formulation is doing. So instead of going and doing a study in patients or in healthy volunteers or spending that much money, you can have that data available in front of you. And if you have access to some software, if you have access to GastroPlus, if you have access to GastroPlus or PK simulation, PKSim software, you can even run a virtual bioequivalence to see what kind of impact it will have on your pre-study outcome. For an example, I have made a batch. I have reduced its dissolution by by let's say 15%. I don't know how exactly my formulation is going to behave. If I have this model, I can run a virtual bioequivalence study and I can tell them, okay, my model, see, I have this model fit, and based on this model, I can say that even if my dissolution is lower by 15%, my product is still passing. So this is the way you can, bridge the gap, information gap, or the data requirement gap from at your end. Now, coming to some other factors, we have talked about IVIVC. It's a very robust, data, a model. But what are the limitation factors over here? Why it is not being used so nicely or so in that advanced way nowadays? The first and most important factor is it is not able to predict few of the formulation factors when if there is any change in the rate controlling polymer. When I say this, I would like to explain over here is we are talking about qualitative change, not the quantitative change. IVIVC is able to predict the quantitative changes, but not the qualitative changes. For an example, I am changing from HPMC E4M to HPMC E10. Whether it would be able to predict that changes? No, it will not be. Apart from this, this model is not able to predict the changes in excipient which have any impact on absorption. For an example, I have increased the amount of mannitol in my formulation. What kind of impact it will have on my GIT motility? It may enhance my GIT flow, and it may in fact further lead to faster gastric emptying. But what kind of will my model be able to predict those changes over there? IVIVC model, no, it will not be able to change to predict that model. And the third point is use of mean dissolution data and mean PK data. IVIVC is completely based on the mean data. So let's say if I have 6 tablets which are behaving entirely different in dissolution, and it has, let's say, a percentage RSU of more than 10%. Will this model be able to predict that data? It will not be able to predict how those different tablets will behave when they are ingested in the body. And the most important thing over here is whenever we do this model, it is not using any potency corrected data. When I say potency corrected data, it is basically balancing the assay value. For an example, my test formulation is having assay of 100, but my reference is having assay of 96%. There is a gap of 4% in my assay value. Is this model taking care of those differences? No, it is not. Apart from this, this model is also not, IVIVC model is not able to predict various physiological factors such as extensive first pass metabolism. As I have explained earlier, it relies on the fact that dissolution is the only rate limiting factor. What about extensive first pass metabolism? If my drug is getting metabolized, how it's going to act over there? How much amount of drug is going to be absorbed? This IVIVC model is basically not able to predict even for highly variable drug product. If the variability for my drug product is more than 30%, this model does not hold true. You may get a value, you may get a very good prediction value while developing the model and validating it. But when you get the actual outcome from the study, it may be entirely different from what you have predicted. As of now, this model, IVIVC, does not take care of the food effect. It does not take care about the flip-flop pharmacokinetics. There is no option where you can pull that data in and you can see the impact. And this does not have any role to plug in the data which has a non-linear PK. What are the factors affecting the non-linearity? Is it because of absorption? It is because of excretion? You cannot put these data over there. And these are the major limiting factors which led to the evolution of PBPK modeling. So Now we know IVIVC. We understand how to develop an IVIVC and what are the limitations. Now let's see what exactly PBPK modeling is. When I see PBPK modeling, it is basically a physiologically based pharmacokinetic modeling. It is again same as IVIVC model. It is a mathematical model technique for predicting the whole ADME profile of a compound in human and animal using not only the compound is physicochemical data, but also incorporating the physiology over there. So what it does, it basically allows a mechanistic and prospective prediction of drug PK profile, and it helps into a new drug development. So now let's have a look at this picture. When we talk about IVIVC, we will only look at this part. The drug has been administered, and now we are having a absorption profile available. But when we say PBPK model, it will also talk about what will be the impact of PK, what will be the impact of solubility, pH solubility profile, what will be the impact of biorelevant solubility, what is the impact of precipitation of drug into the GIT. It will also talk about fraction of drug absorbed, whether the permeation is by transcellular permeability or paracellular permeability. Is there any liposomal tracking, or what kind of information is available over there? Apart from this, it will also give you an idea about liver metabolism, hepatic uptakes, and how the drug is getting metabolized in GIT as well as in liver. And then you can have a fraction solubility calculation, and finally you will have your graph. So to simplify it further, PBPK modeling is basically a compartment-based flow type of pharmacokinetic modeling. If you are able to understand this, this is a relatively easy to conceptualize. But if you look at the graph, if you look at the data what I'm presenting, it might look pretty difficult to you as of now. But trust me, once you have a command on this, once you have a hold on this, this is pretty easy to make. Over here, basically each compartment represents a discrete physiological entity. For an example, let's say I want to talk about how my formulation is behaving into duodenum, right? So in duodenum, we can predict what is the amount of unreleased drug, what is the amount of undissolved drug, how much drug is dissolved, how much drug is getting into enterocytes and getting metabolized. And you can break the whole part. You can even see how it is behaving in your jejunum, how it is behaving in your upper part of ileum, and how much drug is available even at the part of colon. So basically, what it does, it takes your whole physiological system, divides into a different part, and you can have information available for each and every part of your GIT. And once you have this information available, you can use this model could be used to describe the drug concentration in each organ over a period of time. We can show that how much drug is being released, dissolved in duodenum. At the same time, if you want to see, okay, this is the amount present in duodenum. What is the amount I'm getting at the colon? At the same time, you will have even this information available over there. And the most important point about this model is it can permit the modeling at the molecular level events, such as specific metabolic pathway. You can add information about various enzyme expressions and all, and you can have this information available over there as well. So now coming to the historical aspect, we all know about IVIVC. Now let's talk about how this PBPK modeling came into the picture. The first concept of PBPK modeling was published in the year 1937 by a scientist called as Torsten Thorell. So after that, there was a gap of a couple of years, and then in 1959, Elderman and Lieben has developed a more sophisticated model for this PBPK modeling. And in 1977, the first paper was published with the word PBPK in its title. So once from 1977 onward, this thing starts picking up uptrend. And in 1990, US FDA has used PBPK modeling to give approval for tretinoin gel. So at that point of time, the most of the simulations were done using Winonlin or SAS or other softwares. But in year 2000 onward, there are many dedicated PBPK modeling commercial software came into the picture. Few of them are Simcyp, PKSim, and GastroPlus. And these things keep on evolving from that time onward. And in the year 2016, FDA and EMA. FDA is the regulatory authority for US and EMA is for Europe. They have published their first draft guidance for PBPK modeling. And in year 2018, they have finally published the guideline for the final guideline for PBPK modeling. So now if you see that graph, the submissions what we are having or the publications what we are having, the numbers are increasing. And now more and more focus is moving towards PBPK modeling. So now we know what the PBPK modeling is, how and where we can use this. The first and most important factor is this modeling could be used to study the impact of extrinsic factors. When you say extrinsic factor, it are the factors which are not governed by the dosage form itself. And they are basically concomitant medications. What will happen if you take two medicines together? What kind of impact one may have on another one, or one may have on absorption profile of the next one. This also talks about drug-drug interaction. What will happen if I take one drug with two drugs together which are metabolized by same pathway? What if I'm taking two drugs from which one drug used to replace other drug from protein binding? So this tool could be used to predict even that model. This tool is able to predict the impact of food as well. What will happen if you take food, if you take your formulation with meal? This tool will be able to predict you that, which IV-IVC was not able to do that over there. This modeling could be used for cross-species exploration. For an example, if I have data published in DRAC, and I want to see how my formulation will behave if I dose the same product in humans. This tool, this modeling could be used for that purpose as well. This is also used to assess the oral absorption in special population. When I say a special population, this could be geriatric patient, pediatric patient, and we can even predict this thing over there. This could be used to understand the impact of gastric pH on absorption. In many times, many geriatric patients have a different pH into the GIT. This could be used to tell how much drug will get absorbed and what kind of PK profile they will have when the drug is given to them. This could be used, the data what we have right now, absorption in special population, effect of gastric pH, this could be used to design even the dosing recommendation. You have to take 1 tablet per day, you have to take 2 tablets per day, what should be the dosing gap? All these things could be used, could be predicted by using this model. This tool could also be used to understand the impact of organ dysfunction. For an example, if I have liver dysfunction, what dosage should I take? If I have a kidney dysfunction, what kind of dosage should be taken? This model is able to predict that information as well. This will be able to predict what will be the impact of any disease status on PK. What will be the impact of genetics on PK and dosing regimen as well. So everything you can predict with this one. This could also be used to define the biorelevant specification for critical material attributes and critical process parameters. And this could be used for selection of clinically relevant dissolution profile. Normally, the dissolution ranges or dissolution profiles, what we do right now, they are not clinically relevant. But once we have this information, this could be used even to justify if there is any change in your dissolution profile. And we can prove that any change in this profile is not clinically relevant. So it gives you a safe design space to work on your formulation. And nowadays, FDA is using this model extensively for development of product-specific guidelines. So there are 6 or 7 guidelines which were published this year, were exclusively based on PBPK modeling. So there's one very important, pertinent question. I hear it from most of the scientists and most of the students basically. What is PBPK model and what is population PK model? To be very honest, they are basically the same thing, but they have a slight difference into how the modeling is done. So PBPK model, as we have seen, it is basically made up of interlinked and distinct physiological functions, where complex models are there for organ and tissue level. But when we say POP-PK model, it is a very straightforward, very easy model, which is based only on the compartmental model, divided into central and peripheral model, and it does not have a very significant or very distinct physiological function. On PBPK modeling, it is basically a bottom-up approach, which starts from what has been understood at the organ or tissue level. It will talk about enzyme expression, it will talk about your expression of enzymes, your fat content in your liver and all. But if we talk about POP-PK model, it is totally based on what is information is available with us, and it's a top-down approach. And a PBPK model is basically used to determine the relationship between drug ADME at molecular level, whereas the POP-PK model describes the relationship between clearance and organ function. That's all. PBPK model does not take care of variability, in vivo variability or variability in at the liver or organ function. But when we use POP-PK model, this could be used to estimate the individual variability in PK parameters, in clearance and volume of distribution as well. So basically, they both are same. The only difference between these two things are how we incorporate the data and what information we plug in. So coming down to the software, a very important question over here: what softwares are available? What we can use? So as of now, we have many software available. I have named a few over here. And out of these two, I have in past, I have worked on PKQuest, I have worked on SimSip, we have worked on PKSim, and currently we are focusing more and more on GastroPlus, where PK Plus is the one thing which is focusing more and more on PBPK modeling. But for academics purpose, this tool is available free as of now. PKSim could be used for free, and it's a very, very good tool, a very smart tool, and it's pretty available. So, okay, now we know what PBPK modeling is, what software we can use. But now comes the most important point. What are the building blocks for this PBPK modeling? There are three things, three parameters what we need to consider whenever we are developing a PBPK modeling. The first one is physiological properties. The second one is drug properties, and the third one is formulation and clinical study design. There are few factors which are common for physiological and drug properties. We will be discussing each and everything in detail now. So when I say physiological property, what we are talking about is anatomy and physiology of the human GIT or wherever the drug is working. So we need to understand what is the organ volume, what kind of blood circulation it has, what kind of absorptive surface area is available into that part. If I'm talking about a stomach, whether my drug is, what kind of drug will get absorbed from there. We need to understand the tissue composition, how much fat content it has, how much protein is there, how much carbohydrate is stored over there, what kind of impact it may have on our PK profile. We need to understand the blood flow rate. If we are talking about basically about lung and other parts, we need to focus more and more on that area. We need to understand about the enzyme expressions level, what kind of enzyme is present, whether CYP3E4 is more over there or CYP2D6 is more over there. So these kind of information on physiological parameters is must to have. Coming down to the drug properties, we need to have information available on lipophilicity, log P value, log D value, molecular weight, pKa, pH solubility profile. These are the basic factors, basic information what we need to have for available for our formulation. And there are few properties which are common for physiology and drug products as well. The first one is drug absorbed. How much, what is the fraction of drug absorbed in the body? If we have this information available with us, that's very, very good. What is the permeability of this drug? What is how the drug gets absorbed, whether it's an active process or it is done by the passive transport process. What is the partition coefficient of the drug? So these are the properties, these are the information which you can, even if you don't have available on your own, you can get this information from literature. Now, the third and most important factor is formulation and clinical study design. So on formulation related factors, one need to understand what kind of release mechanism your formulation has. Apart from this, what type of formulation it is, whether it's an IR dosage form or it is an ER, it is a pellet-based system, or it's a floating system, what kind of formulation it is. And we need to have information available on administration, how the drug should be administered over there, and what kind of dosing regimen we are following and how we are administering the dose. What kind of special events are we talking about? Food intake, what kind of physical activity we are doing, and is the drug even goes with hepatic enterohepatic recirculation sort of thing. So if I have to, sum this information up and see what information is available with us, what information is not available with us. So let's say for input parameters, if I don't have any information available on API data, how can I, from where I can get those information? So nowadays, these simulation-based softwares have different, modules which we can use to draw this data. So you just have to do is you have to draw in silico structure over there, and it will pull down all the parameters, all the physical properties based upon the structure whatever you have created. You can, if you don't have oral and IB data, you can use PK simulation. You can use 3D solver to predict, take the data from any published literature information. You can use the data from in vitro metabolism, and you can have this information available over there. And once you plug in all the data over there, you can simply go with your modeling and you will have your outcome. So even if you don't have API data available, there are tools, there are various software, free softwares available, which you can use to generate this data. So now coming down to the flow diagram of this modeling. So basically, if you see that to develop a PBPK model, you not only need artificial intelligence, but you need to understand there is an optimum blend of artificial intelligence as well as the human intellect. If you don't know what to put in the data, you will not have a proper outcome over here. So let's see how exactly we develop a PBPK model. The first step involved over here is a model setup. For this model setup, normally we use in vivo oral data. For this, normally we take IR, intravenous data is the most preferable one, but if we do not have intravenous data available with us, we can use IR data. From where you can get this IR data? There are, if you have a study data published with you, your own in-house data, that is the best one. But if you do not have this information, you can use any literature data, and you can have a compartmental fitting by PK plus or even by a PK solver, and you can have all the parameters available over there. So once you have this PK model developed, you have to go and develop your PK oral absorption model, and you have to do the internal validation. So how we develop an oral absorption model? For that, we need to have the biopharmaceutical properties of the drug. We need to have a formulation detail available of the drug. We need to have a physiological setup of the drug, as we have seen in the earlier slide, as a building block. And once we have all the data, you also need to have a compartmental PK information available, whether my drug is following one compartment model, two compartment model, or three compartment model. So these are the basic information what we need to have while setting up the model. Once my model is set up, what is the next step? The next step is model validation. So this should be validated with maximum available different clinical data sets. You can do the model validation using the external validation, and you can even do the sensitivity analysis. For an example, let's say I have data available for two formulation where there is difference between the particle size. If I have that data, I will put both the data in this model and see whether my model is able to predict the changes into particle size or not. And once this model is validated, we can use this model to predict the in vivo performance of the upcoming batches or the recent batches. So that part is defined as model application part, where target in vitro data or intended model application would be put into the place. You can use this data. You can plug in the data from your proposed formulation. You can do a population simulation, and at the end, you can even run a virtual bioequivalence to see how your formulation is going to behave when it is giving to a set of volunteers in a specific condition. Once you have this data, it gives you in silico dissolution state space. When I say state space, it means the dissolution range in which, let's say, I'm giving a range of 60 to 80%. It means even if you are at the range of 60% or at the range of 80%, your drug is going to behave in a similar way. Your product will be bioequivalent over there. And once we have the data, let's say we are observed that over the stability, my dissolution at 8 hours is reduced from 60% to 50%. You can use the B trials with the theoretical target batches as well. You can predict what kind of PK behavior it may show over there. So basically, the whole PBPK modeling development is based on three steps: model setup, model validation, and model application. So now I will be taking you through a couple of the case studies, what we have done over a period of time, or what we came across while doing such kind of uh, experiments. And if you look at the presentation, so the points what I'm going to discuss, everything will be based on three steps: model setup, model validation, and finally model application, and to see where exactly do we stand. So my first case study is about a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, which was present in a topical dosage form. So as per US FDA bioequivalence recommendation for this drug, any generic company who want to file this product, they have to do two studies. The first one is single dose two-way crossover PK bioequivalence study in healthy volunteers. And the second was bioequivalence study with clinical endpoint in subjects with osteoarthritis of knee. So this study is basically a clinical endpoint study. And if we talk about this dosage form, looking at the variability, if I want to do a clinical endpoint study, the cost will be huge. I would need at least 1,200 volunteers to do this kind of study. So money involved, time involved is extensive. So what we have decided, we decided to propose an alternate bioequivalence approach. And we decided that we want to have a composition which will be qualitatively, quantitatively, and structurally similar to that of R&D product, to the reference product. When we call this formulation as Q1, Q2, Q3 similar formulation, and we propose that we will be doing a PK study, and rest other things would be explained based on the PPPK modeling. So to take this forward, we decided to have meeting a pre-ANDA meeting sort of thing with US FDA. When we presented this idea to them, they basically agreed with overall strategy to utilize a PBPK modeling based approach. So now, how we worked ahead. The first thing was to decide the strategy, what kind of work we need to do. So for this submission purpose, we have used a SimSip platform, which was developed by Certara. And the whole information was based on MPML MEC Derma model. It is a Derma absorption model developed by SimSip. We will be showing you I will be showing you the same model in the next few slides. And then we collected the compound file, which includes all the data available from API. Then we have a population file, which contains all the data available on the population PK front. All three factors. We need to have a model based on the derma, the compound file, which contains information about physicochemical properties and your dosage form, and then the PK profile. So we fit these. We decided to fit this into a PBPK model and first do the model sensitivity analysis. And to check this whether my model is suitable or not, we have decided to look even for the IV prediction, dermal prediction, and systemic and local concentration data as well. So once we have this model developed, we have we went back and we verified our model using IV data and see where do we stand. So once this model is done, as we have discussed earlier, we plugged in the data from in vitro data from reference and test formulation, and then we will have the reference formulation systemic concentration and test formulation systemic and local concentration, and then we will have our bioequivalence analysis, and then we will have the conclusion. So based on this strategy, we went ahead and we have log p-value, molecular weight, what kind of hydrogen bond my formulation has, and ionization at skin surface. On formulation properties front, we had information available about diffusion coefficient, vehicle molecular volume, and viscosity. But the most extensive data what we needed for this model development was based on the population parameter. We need to have a skin surface pH. We need to have number of subcutaneous layers. What is the corneocyte dimension? What is the water concentration in different level of my dermal tissue? What is intercellular lipid thickness? What is the corneocyte pH? What is the lipid and sebum viscosity in my different layer of my skin? So these are the basic factors what we need to have, and we have gathered all this information through the public available information, and we have put it into the model. Now, coming to the model development, verification, and application. So this is basically the MPML McDermott model, which was developed by Certara, and it has different layers divided. It has stratum corneum, viable epidermis, dermis, subcutis, and deep tissue. So once you apply the formulation on the skin, this model could easily predict how my formulation is going to move through different layers, where it's going to get absorbed, and at what layer, what kind of elimination of clearance will happen. So this was a very, very robust model, and the same model was used for the predictions as well. So when we have started developing this model, we have collected data on 8 topical dosage forms. And we have in vitro data, we have systemic data, and we have local concentration data and clinical data available as well. So why 8 topical dosage forms? We wanted to verify this model that even if we are not using it for diclofenac or my NSAID, would it be able to produce, will be able to predict that absorption for those kind of drugs. So initial model was developed using IV data to ensure the clearance and BD. And later on, we have plugged into data related to dermal absorption. And once we have this data plugged in, we again, we went back and validated the whole model using this 8 topical dosage form data. And we were able to see that the predictions, whatever we have got, was very, very close to that of observed data. So after having this information available, this model developed, verified, we input the data from our test and difference formulation, and we have predicted the whole thing up. And here is the outcome. So if you look at the first image, this is basically observed test versus reference plasma concentration. So what we have done, we assumed, we have done one PK study as well. So this data was taken from the PK study. But if you look at the graph which is just beside that, this is a simulated test and reference plasma concentration. And this data was very, very similar to that of observed one, with mean relative difference of only 1% for AUC, 3% for Tmax, and around 7% for AUC. So the model, if you develop a model in a proper way, if you validate it in a proper way, this is the kind of data what you can get. And this is only about the systemic data. So what about the local subcutaneous absorption? Absorption in dermis, absorption in subcutaneous system, absorption in synovial fluid. So if you look at this data, what we have is the differences between observed and predicted was less than 5% throughout the prediction. So with this model, it is pretty much simple to predict the virtual bioequivalence using PBPK modeling. And what we got out of it, FDA accepted the PBPK modeling based approach, and this product was the first product approved in year 2019 using the simulation-based PBPK approach using Certara software. So if you have a proper model developed, if you have all the data in place, if your model has been validated properly, this could be a very, very handy tool, and it could be used for approach for proposing a new alternative approaches for bioequivalence studies as well. So this was the first case study what we have, which was based on molecular level event. Now we have also talked about POP-PK. Let's see how and where we have incorporated that information. So this was API was typically a BCS class 2 drug, which is low salt soluble and highly permeable. Formulation was extended release matrix based formulation, and pH, it has a pH dependent solubility with lower solubility at acidic pH, and as we keep on increasing the pH, solubility was started decreasing. For this product, there was no food effect, and it has a linear pK. So when we developed this formulation, this was for submission for UK for EMA, and we have generated data for fasting and spread B study for high risk strength. And for lower strength, we have only generated data on fed study. We have not done fasting based study for lower strength, and we also have B study data available for IR formulation. So, and also we have dissolution data available for all the batches. Now, why we thought of doing a PBPK modeling for this one? Over here, the main difference was the higher and lower strength. formulations are different in composition to match basically the dose proportionality sort of thing. And since we have not done a fasting B study data for the lower strength, the regulatory authority came back of asking justify the absence of fasting B study data for the lower strength. So what we have done, what was the step uh, for us? What should we have done? What we did, we decided, okay, we have all this data available with us. Why don't we utilize PBPK modeling and see how it works out for us? So what we did, as we have discussed earlier, we again went with the same flow chart. We did a model setup based on the PK data, whatever is available with us. We have fasting and fed data for higher strength, fed data for the lower strength, and we have IR based data. So we plugged into that data in GastroPlus model, and we got our model set up over there. The second thing was validation or verification. We have four B study data available with us and all the resolution. We use the same data to validate our model and see where exactly do we stand. And then at the end, we have put the resolution data over there for the lower strength, and we have predicted the fasting study outcome. So looking at the inputs, the physicochemical properties was molecular weight was somewhere around 800, pKa was 5.1, my permeability was 4.3 into 10 to the power minus 4, log P was 1.5, dosage volume 250 mg, and pH solubility was around 0.07. So, and this is the IR data what we have used for generate the UIR. And this is when we have developed this model based on IVIVC as well as PBPK model. You can see over here is that prediction error for Cmax was less than 2%. And for EC, it was less than 10% throughout, be it EC 0 to T or EC 0 to infinity. And this whole model building was done using higher strength formulation, using fasting B study data. So what we did to validate this model, we went back and we modified, we predicted the model for fed B study for higher strength, and the same data was used to predict the B study for lower strength as well. And the profiles, whatever we got, was very, very close to what we have observed. This is observed versus predicted. You can see that profiles are pretty much similar to what we have got. And prediction error was less than 5% throughout the prediction range. And so what we have decided, okay, now we have the model validated. Let's plug kind of outcome we are getting. When we plug the data for the fasting B study, we have observed that the Cmax, what we got was in the range of 96%, with the CI limits of 90.6 to 102. So basically, the product was found to be bioequivalent even in the form of in this fasting condition, even though we have not done the study. So what we have decided to submit this virtual B study outcome to EMA, and looking at the data and the model what we have developed, the product was finally approved without doing any further studies, without asking for any further studies. So if you have this kind of model, if you have population PK model properly developed, you can avoid many studies. So you need not to do many studies on various formulations. Also, let's say you have developed one formulation today and you have done some changes in the formulation which is coming out of SUPAC level. You can use this model even to justify those changes. So coming to the regulatory acceptance part of this modeling. So as of now, this model is readily accepted by Japan, China. The whole Europe have started accepting this model. MHRA, EMA, everyone is accepting that. FDA is the leading one who is working very closely with other regulatory authorities across the globe to accept that. Health Canada is also started accepting the model, and same goes with Anvisa, which is a Brazilian regulatory authority. So nowadays, the learning is becoming advanced, and more regulatory authorities, they are open for such kind of acceptance for these kind of model development and PBPK modeling. But what does this mean? Does this mean that you are able to develop a model, but what are the difficulties we are facing? What are the challenges normally we are facing these days? The first one is, and the most important one is appropriate selection of input parameters. If we don't understand our formulation well, if we don't understand what factors may have an impact on my B study outcome, you will not be able to plug in the proper parameter. The second point is assumptions. What kind of assumptions are you making into your when you are developing the model? How you are going to optimize your model? These are the factors which play a very crucial role in the success of any PBPK modeling. Model verification, the most important one. How you have verified our model. If you have seen our previous cases, we have we have verified our PBPK model for derma using IV data. So my model was robust enough to predict all the conditions and all the possible site of administration and the drug concentration in blood, in plasma, in synovial fluid, even at the tissue level. But is your model that is strong and has been verified properly? Fourth point is lack of biorelevant in vitro dissolution method. Whatever dissolution media nowadays we are using, they are basically normal buffer. But human body acts differently from what we do it in vivo. So have we ever tried using biorelevant media? Do we understand what kind of impact my formulation will have if it goes through the simulated gastric fluid? Normally, we do dissolution at pH 6.8 to simulate the intestinal condition. But what will happen if I put my drug into or my formulation into FASGF, fasted state simulated intestinal fluid? What kind of impact it will have? We don't have that information available. And the most important point is biopharmaceutics knowledge. We don't know how my formulation is going to travel in the body. If I'm taking an ER matrix, how much time it will take to move out of the stomach, how much time it will take to move from jejunum to ileum, how much time it will take to move from ileum to colon. If we are talking about pellet-based formulation, how much time a pellet takes to start, move from stomach to colon. So we need to understand those factors. If we don't know that, it will be very hard for us to develop this model and validate it even. Better understanding of excipient effect is must to have knowledge to understand the formulation performance in vivo. For an example, if we are adding, let's say, a surfactant into a formulation. So we do understand that surfactant increases the solubility. But what if many of us are not aware that surfactant also plays a very important role on permeability. It disrupts the membrane and the permeability is very fast in those conditions. If we don't know those parameters, we will be wrongly interpreting, putting those information in the system and getting something else, not getting the proper result. So better understanding of excipient effects is a must to have information what a person should know. Proper infusion of critical material attribute and critical process parameters for commercially available software. This is one thing which is normally missing. People are not even aware of that. What are the critical process parameters, what they need to evaluate when they are going for model sensitivity analysis. And the most important factor is the identification and a transparent communication of knowledge gap. Many times I have seen formulation scientists, they don't know about how the drug is moving in the body. Many times they will not say anything. But this is a time, if you want to work on this PBPK modeling, you need to understand not only the PK part, but you should be aware of the formulation factors as well. You need to understand more and more about biopharmaceutical aspects of drug development as well. You need to understand how my formulation is moving in the body, how my excipients will have any impact on the permeation or let's say release from my dosage form. These are the must to have information, and as of now, these are the information what is basically missing from the current scientists, or this is how we should bridge the gap. These are the challenges what we have right now. So to summarize my whole talk, PBPK model is a very well-defined and qualified validated model which could be used to predict and aid regulatory decision making. This could be used for generic drug development process, but still it is a very underutilized tool in the industry. And the reason is, as we have discussed, the challenges what we are facing right now. This could have a very good application in QBD. So if I remember correctly, Paritosh gave a presentation a couple of days back, right? So let's say you are doing, you went back and you have made some changes in your formulation based upon your QBD, but you want to see how how these formulations are going to behave in vivo. So for that purpose, if you have this model available with us, you can simply predict what kind of outcome it may have. It could be helped in establishing IV-IVC and IV-IVE for in vitro dissolution experiments. This could also be used for virtual bioequivalence assessment, as we have seen in my previous slide. And once you have this information, this could aid for regulatory decision making as well. This could be used to assess untested scenarios, like let's say I want to give this information, let's say generic data assessment. For an example, I have a fasting study data available. I want to see how my formulation is going to behave if I'm giving it 2 hours after food. So for that kind of studies, you may use this tool, and you will be able to develop the whole model out of it. So now the point is how to increase. This is still an underutilized tool. How to increase the PBPK modeling. So what we need to have is more case examples. Once we have more case studies available with us, it will lead to more confidence and more learning where it works and where it does not. As of now, USFDA has published few guidelines for PBPK modeling, but what we need is more clear-cut guideline on what are the model qualification areas. And apart from this, we need to have a very strong interdisciplinary collaboration between the modeling scientists, biopharmaceutical scientists, formulation, and the clinical scientists. Because if you all remember, we have 3 building blocks over here. We need to have data on physicochemical property, we need to have a data on formulation, and we need to have a data on PK. So if we have a strong collaboration between all these groups, biopharmaceutical scientists, formulation scientists, and clinical scientists, then only we will be able to have this thing fulfilled. So yeah, that's all from my presentation today. If you have any questions, suggestions, please feel free to ask.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Bhupesh Pratap, for the inspiring lecture that you delivered on PBPK modeling in drug development. Your message was exactly what we needed to hear and is more useful for student community. Sir, with your permission, now I will ask the questions on behalf of participants.
Sure, sir. Yeah.
Sir, whether the pharmacokinetic model are applicable for the pregnant women or not?
Okay. So if you're talking about PBPK modeling and all, there are ways you can even predict the model for pregnant females and fetal transport of the data as well. It's doable. There are models available for that as well.
Sir, assumption based on the pharmacokinetic model is ideal for the patient receiving.
Okay. See, when we talk about patient, see, most of the PK parameters, what is available is based on the healthy volunteer data, right? So if you have information, if you want to ask me about how the disease condition and other things will have an impact on the PK profile, in that condition, you should use PBPK modeling, where it has all the parameters. You can even, let's say for an example, a patient has a liver dysfunction sort of thing. You can put the same how much his liver is functioning, or his or her liver is functioning. You can put the data over there, and once you put that data, it will give you the outcome, what kind of profile it may have. So yes, if using this software, you can even predict the data for the disease conditions as well.
Sir, if a drug is responded based on the genetic variability in developing countries, then the pharmacokinetic model is feasible or not?
See, when we say genetic, variability, we are basically thinking about metabolism patterns, right? So, if it has something to do with the, let's say, drug is, first one is absorption, and the second one will be the metabolism, and the third one will be the elimination. These are the 3 factors what normally get affected by the genetics. So in this tool, in PBPK modeling, you have an option to change the values at all 3 fronts. For an absorption parameters, let's say it is getting absorbed by a certain transporter. You can even change the expression of the transporter in your model, and you can see how the absorption will be for a person who has a less number of transporters as compared to person who has higher number of transporters. Same thing you can do for the metabolism. Let's say I have a lesser number of CYP3A4 and Kishore, you have a higher number of CYP3A4 in the body. You can use this tool to predict even that.
Okay, sir. Can we use the guinea pig as an animal model for the pharmacokinetic study of cardiovascular drugs?
Can you please come back again?
Can we use the guinea pig as an animal model for pharmacokinetic study of cardiovascular drug?
Wow, that's a tough one. Okay, so see, in my experience, whatever work I have done, I have not used a guinea pig for cardiovascular. When I was in NIPA, our main focus was on mice model. So to be very honest, I will not be the right person to answer on that. But if I go with a normal physiology function and all, it looks like most likely you can use that model. There are some published literature available for use of guinea pig for cardiovascular diseases as well.
Sir, what should be the time point taken to do a pharmacokinetic study of short-acting drug?
When we say short time interval, do we mean the faster Tmax? Okay, so let me put into a different way. Whenever you are doing a PK-based study, you have to characterize your absorption phase, you have to characterize your Tmax phase, and then you have to characterize your elimination phase. For the characterization of Tmax, we need to have at least 4 to 5 time points to characterize my Tmax completely. To characterize my absorption phase, to characterize my Tmax, we need to have at least 4 to 5 time point during that point during my Tmax region. And to characterize the elimination, I need to have 4 to 5 points to characterize my elimination properly. So for any study, any PK-based study, if you are doing it in the humans, you need to have 12 to 14 data sets to characterize the whole curve. But if you're talking about animals, it is completely based upon what information you have available on your drug and what kind of dosage form you are using.
Thank you, sir. With your permission, now I request Professor A. Pramila Rani Madam, Principal, University College of Pharmaceutical Sciences, Acharya Nagarjuna University, to give her expert advice regarding the applicability of this topic with respect to academic curriculum. Please proceed, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Sai Kishore.
Yes.
And thank you so much, Bhupesh ji, for your very illustrative and informative lecture on PBPK. And actually, I have some queries, sir. Sir, you have
Ma'am, we cannot hear you.
Study so advantages and hello.
Ma'am, yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
Hello, sir. Do you hear me, sir?
Yeah, you are audible now. Can you repeat the question?
Okay, sir. No, that is my question is at your company, that is Perigo. For all formulations, you have taken up this type of model for detection of pharmacokinetics and parameters for all types of drugs.
Okay, so ma'am, as of now, we have taken these model for basically for the derma formulation. We are using this model
dermal
for
formulations only.
No.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask to you, because in PBPK,
also on the oral, we have used it also for the oral oral formulations as well, oral solid dosage form, oral solutions as well. We have used it for all three.
Okay. And I think by using this PBPK, maybe it is easy for detect nonlinearity of a stage.
Ma'am, your voice is breaking up. I cannot hear you properly.
Hello. Yeah, hello, sir. Detection of non-linearity. Is it easy by using the system?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, even if you have a non.
Hello.
Yeah. Am I audible now?
Hello.
Okay. So you are asking about whether PBPK modeling is useful to predict for a drug which follows the non-linear PK, right? So yes, this tool could be very well used to predict the PK profiles for non-linear drugs as well. When we say non-linearity, we need to understand from where this non-linearity is coming in picture. Again, as we have told, it could be basically because of the absorption, it could be because of the metabolism, or it could be because of the elimination. And so you can change the expressions of these enzymes at different levels, and you can predict for all the conditions. So that is doable.
Thank you, madam, for your words of wisdom. We have been fortunate to be assisted by you as one convener for this webinar. Thanks for your constant cooperation and support. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, Sai Kishore. Thank you. Thank you, Sai Kishore. Do you hear me?
Yes, madam.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Bhupesh ji. Thank you. It is very wonderful lecture, which is very much useful for all the teachers and students also, because of keeping in view the syllabus framed by Pharmacy Council of India. There are so many novel topics that are being introduced in the syllabus, and this might be the one of them, and which is very, very useful, not only students, but also teachers. So thank you so much, sir. Bhupesh ji, thank you so much.
Yeah, most welcome, ma'am. Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
We hope the purpose of organizing this webinar is fulfilled and seek the same response in the future also. On behalf of Bapatla College of Pharmacy, I convey my heartfelt thanks to Mr. Bhupesh Pratap and Professor A. Pramila Rani Madam for their valuable cooperation and participation in today's seminar. Thank you. Thanks to one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.